Hello and welcome to Lutherans Alive. This is the program that seeks to tell the stories of all that God is doing through us Lutheran Christians here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. I'm Pastor Tony Schneck, and with me today is Pastor John Sweitzer. John happens to serve the Zion Lutheran Church in Coraopolis, and whereas John is pleased to serve among us Lutherans, Pastor Sweitzer happens to be a pastor from the Presbyterian Church and also serves the Neville Island Presbyterian Church. John, welcome to the program today.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
And welcome to our fellowship here in the Southwestern Pennsylvania Synod. And how long has it been now that you have been, perhaps that's a late welcome, how long have you been among us here in Southwestern Pennsylvania?
I've been serving a Lutheran church now for over 5 years. I started my seminary work at Gettysburg something like maybe 12 years ago, taking one course a semester, not knowing where it would lead, and it finally led to a Master in Sacred Theology. And then when I finished the course, I went up to the Synod office and I said, here I am. I've gotten the benefit of a Lutheran education, and I realized that, very small part of it was paid by the tuition, and I wanted to see if I could be of service to the Lutheran Church. And they said, well, what would be your wish? And I said, my wish would be to find a small Presbyterian church and a small Lutheran church and be able to serve both. And it took a year before Zion opened up, but then at that point they began looking for a pastor, and it was kind of exciting to see how God was moving and how what I wanted, what I had in mind, what I felt that God was calling me for was already being accomplished. And then finally that day came when we had the service of invitation. We couldn't have an installation service. We had a service of invitation, and it was nice because I had people from the Synod, and I also had people from the Presbytery, and people from both congregations involved in the service. And then 2 years ago, I celebrated my 20th year in the ministry, and again, we had a service. We had the service itself at Zion and the reception at Neville. We wanted both congregations to be involved in that, and that was nice because Pastor Bish came down and preached that day, and then Vera White from our presbytery asked me the ordination questions, the same questions that are asked when a Presbyterian minister is ordained. And after 20 years, to hear those questions again was very moving. And then we had people from both congregations involved in the service, and it was a kind of nice testimony to that ministry we've had together now for about 5 years.
I think it's really neat that after so many years, hearing those questions again, sort of hearing the call again to ministry. You say you had served the Presbyterian Church or had served Presbyterian congregations for about 20 years?
Yeah, I'd been an interim pastor going into congregations that had lost their minister and kind of lost their direction. And it was kind of exciting because I told them that while their pastor had left, God was still there, and that God had a ministry for them. And it was kind of exciting. They allowed me to do things, make changes that they would never allow a regular pastor to make. And I always said, when I leave, anything that I did right, you can claim it was your idea. Anything that I did, you can say he had a lot of crazy ideas. But they gave me a lot of latitude in terms of trying new things. And I always told them, that their new pastor was coming, and that, like John the Baptist, I was unworthy to tie the shoelaces, of that new pastor, and built that person up knowing that God had already chosen that pastor. The committee didn't know who it was going to be, but I said, being a good Presbyterian, that this already was decided a long time ago, and that God would work it out. And it has. I had the joy last Sunday of going back to a church that I served, and they were celebrating their 125th anniversary. And I talked to the new pastor, and he's been there 10 years now and has had a wonderful ministry. And I told him how happy I am to see how everything has come together for him. But that's the joy of interim pastorate, being able to go back and see a good situation where the congregation and the minister kind of merge together, and there's a wonderful relationship going on there.
It's interesting. Would you say that your work as an interim then would it be classified as what we call a very intentional interim ministry, and that's been a a big part of what you've done, it
Yeah,
sounds
we
like.
had to do training. We had to go to workshops. We had to do things at the seminary at Laurelville. We had workshops, and we really had been trained that way because we felt that that was an opportunity. There's developmental tasks that every interim pastor has to do, and when you do that with a congregation, it kind of frees them from focusing on what's happened in the past to looking ahead to what they're going to be doing in the future. And it's a wonderful opportunity because, you know, maybe to the outsider you're doing the same thing that an installed pastor would be doing, but you're doing all of that, but you're also saying, you know, we're getting you ready for something you're anticipating, and helping them get an idea of what their identity is. You know, if you've been with a minister for a long time, the identity of the church and the identity of the pastor begins to merge, and they have a real hard time when that person leaves, of saying who they are, what they're there for, what their mission is, what their ministry is. You know, it's hard for them to define that kind of thing when they don't have that pastoral leadership. And here's an opportunity to open it up and say, and in the Presbyterian Church, we require self-study, which is very intensive, and congregations say, you know, what do we need to do all this stuff for? But, you know, they really need to look at themselves and not just say, well, you need a church, we need a minister, when can you start? You know, they need to be able to say, this is what we're looking for in a leader, rather than just taking anyone that comes along. And the clearer they are about what they need and who they are, the better it's going to be when they get a pastor, because they won't be getting a pastor because, you know, isn't it about time we had a minister here? It's the fact that we found someone who shares our vision, who shares our dream. And for me, it's very exciting when that minister comes along and you have the congregational meeting, you know, and they decide on it, because you've seen that process, and you've seen the false starts, you know, and you've seen the good days and the bad days and the disappointments, you know, and the way things turn, and you see how God works in that process of discerning, you know, who the next pastor ought to be.
Seems to me it's a good reminder for us that wonderful ministry can take place in the midst of that interim period. As important as good pastoral leadership is, there is also the ministry of the baptized, the ministry of the lay people that and those baptized people are able to rise up and do things, certainly with the help of a shepherd or a leader, absolutely, but that also wonderful things can happen in that interim time, and some good self-study.
One of the goals is to watch the shift in leadership in the congregation. The people that might have been leaders with the other pastor, all of a sudden they've been in the background, and they say, here's my chance, you know, there's this freedom now, there's this space now in which I can try out my gifts and see what I can do. And getting them encouraged to do that is wonderful, because there are people that said, you know, I just kind of sat back because it seemed like everything had been decided, and you know, the people that were competent were doing the work. And now these people said, you know, here's my chance to kind of test the waters and see too, you know, if I have gifts for the church and if there are things that we can do. And then, of course, when it comes time to choose a committee to serve as a committee looking for a minister, those people, you want a combination of the people who used to be leaders and also the ones that are new leaders, and and maybe people who potentially will be leaders. But just, that's a very important segment, is educating those people. In the Presbyterian Church, we don't have the word clergy and we don't have the word laity. We are teaching elders and ruling elders and deacons, and members by their baptism are also involved in that. So the same questions that are asked of me as a teaching elder are asked of the ruling elders. And so there's really a sense that, you know, there's not a kind of Luther's idea that there should not be, you know, a kind of separation between the leadership in the church and the people who come all the time. It's been carried through really well with that understanding that the church, we're all ministers, and we say that, you know, at Zion too, in our bulletin. But we practice that. We really say, you know, let us like unlock, you know, whatever has been keeping you from doing ministry, and together we're going to do this kind of ministry.
Indeed. It speaks of the priesthood of all believers, certainly. Yeah. Wonderful. More with Pastor John Sweitzer when we return after this short break.